Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and we get their stories. If you can like and subscribe, James, our producer, would be very happy. So today's guest in the Sky Lounge, Mike Biwer. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Todd. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. It's great having you here. So
it's been a while, and it's been my fault. So I'm glad to be on finally.
Yeah, absolutely. So who are you, Mike, and what are you working on these days?
Yeah, I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is my hometown, and I'm working on a pretty cool project. I tend to be drawn professionally, Todd, to things that have where there's an important problem to solve. I'll say a massive amount of under-leveraged data and a large market. And so I'm in a space, it's distribution. It's a fascinating space because it fuels the economy in many ways. It's probably 10 trillion in this economy. 300-some thousand wholesale distributors. And it's like that invisible layer that we never think about. But if you look around yourself, like all the physical things that you see went through distribution. So we think of the big manufacturers, we think of the retailers we buy from, but the distribution sort of space gets forgotten. So work in a company called Cavallo, and we were founded by, I'll tell the story a little bit more, but we were founded by a distributor. And he had a vision for, I'll say, profit-making technology, and he built that out. And so we're 20 plus years in, and that's what I'm working on.
Very cool. Well, so a lot to unwrap there. But first of all, you're a hometown guy, which I love, and you represent your little part of Michigan very well. Even if you have a Michigan State kind of rivalry in the C-suite, but
we
Cavallo,
totally do.
Yeah, so Cavallo is an interesting name for a company. What's the story behind that? I know that's kind of a fun story.
I love this story. We don't tell it enough. We were originally a company called SalesPad, and we still use that name for one of our products. But when I started here in 2019, one of the things we were focused on is building out new products in the cloud. And we were doing some market research on the name SalesPad. And it served us exceptionally well in the Microsoft space, which is where we were started. But the market feedback was, it was confusing. And so long story short, I felt like if you're going to have a descriptive name for your company, it should actually describe what you do. And our name didn't really do that. We did a lot more than things that were sort of sales related. It's like people told us, oh, you must be a field Salesforce tool. And even if we would say, no, we're not, let me explain actually what we do, they would say things like, oh, no, you must be. And so we decided pretty early on that as we moved into the cloud, connecting to more platforms, because we were connected just to one platform, which I can get to in a little bit, we're going into new markets. So a new name would actually work well. And we were doing a lot of internal projects, a lot of product development work, and we were using Da Vinci inventions as code names. So Da Vinci's a pretty inspiring character. You might argue one of the most productive humans that ever lived. Mathematician, engineer, scientist, artist, sculptor, painter. And so we were quite inspired by Da Vinci and his precision and focus. And we were also thinking about the new name for the company. And we were using an outside agency to come up with some names. They actually did a really nice job with a bunch of mood boards and told us the stories. But I didn't love any of the names. And I thought, well, I wouldn't outsource naming my kid. I don't think I want to outsource naming the company. So why don't we take this in-house? And long story short, one of our guys actually found a really interesting intersection between Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Da Vinci.
Okay.
What in the heck is that? Well, he was commissioned in the late 1400s by the Duke of Milan to basically design and build or sculpt a giant statue, a giant equine statue. It was meant to be 20-some feet tall. It would be seen by visitors into Milan from great distances. And Da Vinci was pretty young at the time. He kind of said, he sort of sent in a letter looking for a job and basically said he could build anything. And they settled on building this equine statue. And he was going to make it out of solid bronze. And Michelangelo was a younger man at the time and said it couldn't be done. Anyway, Da Vinci got pretty far along, actually put together a clay model full size. And in the end, war got in the way of finishing this job. All the bronze that he had amassed got turned into cannonballs and other weaponry, and he never finished. So, but he was going to name this statue Il Gran Cavallo. So that doesn't tell the full story. In the 1970s, his drawings were found in Spain. I don't know why Spain, but they were found in Spain. And there was a pilot that actually picked up on this story, and he wanted to finish the job.
Oh, wow.
Well, he wasn't successful, but there's a man from this area named Frederick Meyer who has a giant sculpture garden and statue park down the road. And he picked up on this. He actually did finish the job. So he actually hired a Japanese sculptor. They used the drawings from Da Vinci, and she sculpted, based on that inspiration, what became the American horse. And there actually are two of them now. So there's one of them in Milan and one of them in Grand Rapids, just a few miles down the road. And so we love that connection of Grand Rapids and Da Vinci.
Yeah. Very cool. And it's fun the way you think about, it's got to have connection to what we do, and it's got to be representative. And it's kind of very, it's fun. I talked to a lot of really smart people on the podcast, and culture comes up quite a bit. These little cultural things are very important. So you're setting a tone for the whole company, and this is what's important to us. This is why, it's hometown values, it's hard work, it's beauty, right, form, function, art, getting the job done.
That's right. That was important to us, as you said. And when we unveiled it to the company, to our employees, we actually invited them to the statue.
Neat.
And then we revealed the name.
Okay.
And so that was fun. That was a fun event.
Very cool. And that explains the knight on your desk behind you there.
That's right.
The black horse.
That's exactly right.
Very cool. Well, that's a fun story. So what's actually even more fun to me is, origin stories of these companies. You're obviously a very successful company. So talk about how Cavallo got started. And then, you mentioned you had a distributor that needed something that was missing. And then that's kind of how Cavallo got started. Walk us through the origin story of the company.
Yeah. Back in the, let's say late 80s, early 90s, our founder, Pete, he graduated from Michigan State.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the job market was not great for people with communications majors. He likes to tell this story too. And so he found himself in a sales role. And I'll say sort of commercial office furnishings. And he did that for a while. He was a natural salesperson. And one day woke up and said, I can do this way better than these jokers. And he started his own company, literally from the ground up. He had a barn in the backyard, punched a hole in the wall with a telephone line, and pretty quickly got a business off the ground. And it was the classic, he had sort of 20 periods where he wasn't sure he could make payroll.
Wow.
But he kept at it. And so he's got tremendous grit and resilience and drive. And once he got to the point where he wasn't worrying about making payroll, he basically said, I need a real ERP system. I need a real foundation for this company so I can really grow it. And so he invested in Microsoft Dynamics Great Plains. But he knew at the time that it wouldn't deliver all the things that he really wanted. So he still wanted to make that investment, but he knew he needed to build on top of it. So then he had a big vision. And so he hired sort of his equal from a development standpoint to feature by feature build out what became SalesPad and now Cavallo. And so I like to use this phrase that when you think about product market fit, it was perfect product market fit because he had the proverbial car in the garage and was building each feature right on top of it day in and day out until it was really, he was driving insane results. If you understand profitability and distribution, many of the experts would call it's actually really hard to make money in distribution. So the average distributor, and there's so many, so it's a big curve, right? But the average distributor makes less than a nickel of pre-tax profit for every dollar of revenue. And it's a tremendous amount of work and effort to actually be a distributor. It's very rewarding, but being profitable is challenging. And he found a real formula. And I'm not joking when I say like 10x the industry averages for like pre-tax profit or for return on assets. So he had this vision, Todd, but once he realized what it was doing for him, he called a breakfast meeting with his partner and said, I think we've got a software company too.
Okay.
And so they launched SalesPad. So they spent, I don't know if it was a year or 18 months, turning what he had built for himself into a commercial product. And then they were off to the races, and it always takes a little bit of time, but they were able to sell to roughly 1,000 distributors running Great Plains, which, as you know, just getting to that point is wildly successful, right?
Absolutely.
But there was a limitation, which was they were only connected to one ERP system. And if you look at the giant world of distribution, they're using a lot more than Microsoft Dynamics GP. So I love the story because they had a real business problem, solved it in a real world situation, and then applied it to the rest of the world. And so, yeah.
So a lot of lessons there, and the story kind of keeps going, right? So you started, Cavallo started or at SalesPad and solved the fundamental deficiency. There's a couple features that Microsoft didn't quite get right that were missing for this particular use case, and then you solved it, beautifully. And I know your initial customers have stuck with you for a long, long, long time and are wildly enthusiastic about the product being in their stack. It's a fundamental part of their operation. So, it's not just building exactly the right product for the market, product market fit, but you probably also did something else along the way to make people that insanely wildly happy about the product. You got any insights into what that might be? Is it just simply getting the product right? Is there something you think Cavallo does exceptionally well to take care of the customers and support them in their journey?
Yeah, there are a couple things to say there. One of them is the ERP is a foundational system, and some people would say, that it's designed to do all these different things, and I look at it and say, well, distribution profitability hasn't improved in 4 or 5 decades. And so I think ERP systems, and you know this better than I do, emerged kind of in the 90s. And so I would say if ERP systems were designed to make businesses more profitable, they would have done so by now. And I think of the ERP to the business like I think of your operating system on your smartphone. You need it to run the phone, but it's the killer apps that make the difference. And I think of us as the killer apps for distribution. So first and foremost, I think realizing that each vertical may have unique needs that an ERP designed for multiple verticals they're not going to serve, right? And so what I think the key for our founder was literally being in command of every line item in every order.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you're processing, let's say, hundreds of orders a day, maybe thousands of orders per day, and you've got multiple line items inside of each order, that's a tremendous amount of complexity. And you might have 10,000 customers, you might have 10,000 SKUs. And so being in command of those variables in real time, in every order, every time, that's tremendously powerful. And that's what he did. In the amount of leverage or influence you can get to the bottom line by controlling those variables is quite astounding. In other words, small improvements above the gross margin or gross profit line actually yield significantly higher percentage increases to your net profit. And so that's sort of the secret that he found, was being in command in real time of every line and every order.
Kind of the old Benjamin Franklin, watch the pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves kind of thing.
Right.
But
Right.
but the line, everybody looks at the order and you can kind of guess whether it's profitable or not to some extent. But you can have one whammy in each. It has 100 line items, and if one of them is wildly out of whack, then the whole order you can almost go backwards in some cases,
That's
right? And
right.
it costs your whole operation. And
That's
then you
right.
ship all of it on time, and you got exactly what they wanted, but you just had the pricing a little bit wrong without surveillance. That stuff adds up in a hurry.
It adds
And
up in a hurry. In fact, I had a story this week where there's a customer that asked us to look at their data, and I looked at it pretty quickly and could find with our I'll call it the Profit Intelligence platform. They literally had that saying, death by 1,000 cuts. I found death by 5,000 cuts. They had 5,000 situations over the last 2 periods where cost went up, purchase cost or purchase price went up by a certain amount, and selling price was unchanged.
okay,
And for them, it's a relatively, let's say it's a SMB sort of mid-market company. That was worth 6 figures. Just that one thing.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. We had another company. We've got a product that we call Profit Scan. It kind of does what it says. And there was a West Coast prospect that said, well, let's try it against our thousands of open orders and quotes. And they ran it, and in seconds, it showed several $1 million of variance between what they thought they were making across those orders and what they were actually going to make.
Wow.
And so it's a complex space. The only way to do this at scale is with technology. I sort of think of it like a maximization function where you want to maximize the profit inside of every order. That's number one. And number two, you want to be able to have higher throughput to manage more orders, right? So better orders, more orders.
Yeah. Yeah. And make it up you can't make it up in volume if it's negative, right? So,
that's right. That's exactly right.
And so you have that one professor at Michigan that wrote the book on profitability and distribution, right? And then what was his conclusion? It was the only thing that really matters is margin, right? And then number two is a little bit of payroll might matter as well, labor cost, and everything else is just way down in the noise, right?
Exactly right. When he looks at the influencers on profitability, number one is improving gross margin by far. And you can look at it with the math. I mean, the math backs it up fully. And then number two, distribution businesses are there's a lot of labor. So you might say 60 to 70% of the cost structure below the gross profit line is almost always labor. And so if you can control for those things, that's a good thing. So like, for example, our founder, his sales or revenue per employee was more than 2x the industry average.
Wow. So, when we talk about scaling, right, it seems like, you can kind of muscle your way up to about 5 or 10 million. And you like to tell the story about like the prototypical sales guy who hustles or marketing guy that hustles, gets a little bit of a distribution going, and they kind of bonk around that area, right? And to get much past that, you really have to have automation to really in real time be looking at every line item every time that it goes out the door. And particularly in these economies like right now, where there's a sea change, up and down, your costs and then your pricing is highly variable, month in, month out. I mean, I don't know how you do it on a spreadsheet anymore. You really have to have some kind of really, really smart automation that knows what to look for, which is kind of where you guys are, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And to do that at scale across that complexity, you need technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so do you feel like you see a lot of like single digit million, annual revenue with very thin margin kind of distributors. And then after that, there's not a lot, right? And they quickly get to 50 or 100. And it seems like there's like this huge leap, once you kind of get these systems in place. I don't know what you see in the market. You're way more familiar with that. But that, it seems like they figure it out. You get some software and systems in place, and then it becomes a lot more manageable, a lot more addressable, a lot more scalable.
Yeah, 100%. We have a few customers that I'll say they started with us when they were, I'll say 5-ish million in revenue. And now they're over $1 billion in top line revenue.
That's
And
awesome.
I love to say that they're part of that story, right? We're part of that story, and we're in many cases sort of the operating system. In many cases, our customers actually think of us as the ERP, which I have mixed emotions about, because I
Right.
really don't want us to be an ERP.
Right.
But I think in their words, what that means is you are the operating system of the company.
Right. Right.
And so that part I like.
Not replaceable is a good thing. So
Yes.
yeah, mission
Yes.
critical.
Now what's making it challenging in some ways for anybody that's serving the GP space is Microsoft's making it very clear that they want those customers to migrate off. They've got an end of life that's defined sort of at the end of this decade, roughly. And so a lot of these businesses that are running well need to think about, what am I going to do? Do I accept the risk and stay? Do I get off this ERP and consider Microsoft's alternative, Business Central? Do I consider something new?
So you're hitting on a kind of an interesting business problem that everybody will face eventually, especially in tech where everything kind of moves fast. You've hit an interesting inflection point that was forced on you by one of your core, Microsoft, into life, and then providing one or two upgrade paths, but maybe not seamless and maybe not obvious how to do that. And then so now everybody has to think about, okay, do I really want to take the pain? I remember golfing in the 90s with a guy, and he had just implemented an ERP system. And I was asking him, hey, how'd that go? And it's like, we're fine now. It damn near killed us, for a couple quarters there, but we're okay now, and we're running. And but that's the fear, right? Is you're doing okay, you got thin margins, you can't breathe, and there's just not a lot of room for mulligans in this economy right now. So it's a difficult decision, but you have to do something. How do you, what do you do? And then so you're kind of in that business now where it seems like you have to help your customers who are very loyal, very happy, to now make a change that's uncomfortable, which is, it's not a great conversation that you necessarily want to have. But how do you think about that change management, and then how are you helping your customers through that in general? You've gone through, like, you shipped your software with shrink wrap, on a server in the back room of the factory or the warehouse, to now it's SaaS, now it's, new ERP, maybe Microsoft, maybe not Microsoft. Maybe it was, you bought it through a channel partner, and then maybe now you buy it direct. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts that everybody's got to figure out. What are your thoughts on how to get over that kind of chasm between, okay, we've had a good run with this one particular Microsoft product. How do we get everybody kind of over the hump into what's next?
Right. Well, it starts with one of our philosophies at Cavallo is we're not trying to do anything to push a customer to make a decision. And so I've heard many, these aren't just our customers, but I've heard many, I'll say, distributors or manufacturers on GP say, we're not leaving no matter what. So the business is running well. We accept the low risk. We accept this risk versus the risk of, as you said, switching ERPs and going through that disruption, that time and that cost and so on and so forth. So in that case, we say, we're going to continue to serve you as long as you want to stay. That's just a philosophy that we have. But we're also well prepared to help navigate customers from, say, GP to BC.
Mm-hmm. Microsoft Business Central.
Yep. Microsoft Dynamics Business Central. We probably officially Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Mouthful.
Yeah.
So we built the best of SalesPad from GP. We built the best of SalesPad in the cloud for the Business Central users. And not only did we do that, we actually built what we call Bridge. Da Vinci actually had an invention, Bridge. We actually built a bridge for them as well. Because if you're a business owner, I think more than anything, you want to make sure that your business that's running well today, that it's running well tomorrow. perfect feature parity from one system to the other, as you know as well as I do, isn't really possible. And that no matter what you go to, if you're on GP and it's heavily customized, no matter where you go, you have a big change management initiative, right?
Probably a multi-year, in some cases.
Probably multi-year. That's right. So first and foremost, I like to tell our team, make sure you're helping our customers realize that. Because if they think they're going to go from system A to system B, and it's going to be exactly the same, that's not the case. So do everyone a favor by just being honest about that. But let's be exceptional at helping them manage that move, crossing that bridge. And then what we did was, rather than try to build all of the things that we have on the GP side, I wanted to build only the things that we think we can be sort of best in the world at on the BC side. And I'll say so far so good. But then on top of that, we've built products to go outside of the Microsoft space, because if there are 300,000 plus distributors in the economy, a very, very, very thin slice of that pie are on Microsoft solutions. A lot of companies you just look at the SMB mid-market space, whether it's NetSuite, Acumatica, Infor, Epicor, QuickBooks even. We want to be where all distributors are. And so that was a big strategy move when I got here, was what can we be the best at that we can then build across all these other platforms?
Yeah. And it's the thing over 20 years of operating with, beginning with your pet distributor, Siamese twin company. You grew up in that business and have a lot of really subtle tribal knowledge about what's important and what really matters, and bring that forward, day in, day out.
Yeah. It's an excellent point. Yeah, we weren't founded by, a few Ivy League guys in a Silicon Valley garage. We were founded by a hardcore, tell you a story about Pete. Our founder was so smart and intuitive, but he didn't care about the metrics. The metrics were amazing, but he wasn't focused on the actual numbers and calculating the numbers. In fact, when his business was acquired by private equity, they were asked to look. They asked to look at some of the budgets, and he said, "I don't use a budget. I don't have a budget."
Yeah.
But I remember when I said, "Can I study your P&Ls for the 3 years that you were in business before you sold?" And I told him, I said, your return on asset, I won't share the number exactly, but it was insane. I said, your return on assets was X. And he said, return on what? It just, but the point is he was phenomenally tuned in. It was very intuitive. He could smell, hear, taste, see inefficiency from miles away. And he was so good at squashing it and driving up productivity, and very sales oriented, but also very profit oriented. So
it's kind of like Neo in the Matrix. He kind of sees the margin, bits going by.
That's a good analogy.
That's very cool. Well, you mentioned private equity. So we talked to a lot of people, and they say, "Hey, there's a lot of dry powder. There's not a lot going on in private equity." I think, love to hear it out of your brain. You have a healthy company that's doing well. You get a lot of inbound from private equity, right? So from your perspective, what you think private equity is doing okay? You think they're doing deals? Do you feel like there's a lot going on in private equity in general from your seat as a potential acquisition?
Yeah, we see a lot of inbound interest. I actually talked to several. I like to keep a pulse on the market. I like to also, some of them are quite helpful. So I've got a handful that we stay in touch quite a bit. Activity seems to be pretty good. I think they're being cautious.
Mm-hmm.
For us, I still have a lot to prove in my opinion, and so we're not in a hurry. But we think the market's pretty healthy. I think the market's pretty healthy.
So I talked to a lot of investors or early stage entrepreneurs, And then you guys are in a great spot where Pete is patient, and he's not in a hurry. He's funded it. It's profitable company. And that produces a lot of patience, ability to make good decisions for the future, make bets, a couple years down the road, versus, take a venture capital or institutional money into your company, and that becomes like a grind to really, really squeeze down, sub optimize everything.
That's right.
You get the NBA spreadsheet management style. Do you feel like that's help? Yeah. So you feel like that's helpful? And then how does that change how you are able to manage the company for long-term maximum shareholder value? So I guess Pete and a couple others own the company.
Yeah, it's very different. There's not a lot of bureaucracy getting in the way, and there's Pete has a big vision. We share that big vision, and he's patient, as you said. So it gives us more freedom to try things. He's extremely hungry, so every time I see him, he'll ask me if I've hired 25 more salespeople yet. So he likes to invest, and he wants to win. So I like him as an owner because, well, for many reasons, but one is he doesn't really care about the money. It's about winning. It's about delivering tremendous value in a space that we can help and winning. If he's sold today for X, and in 3 years that business sold for 10X or 20X, that would kill his soul. Like, he doesn't
right, left meat on the table.
Yeah. So he wants to win, and there've been a couple of bumps in the road since I got here. COVID was a year after I started, and that knocked, every 5, this, Todd, right? As well as I do, every 5-ish years there's some black swan event of some sort. And then we decided to sort of rethink how we were approaching the cloud and other ERP systems. So that was a bit of a bump in the road, but now we're moving at a much faster pace. We're connected from not one ERP anymore, but I think we're at 5 or 6 right now.
Wow, that's so fast. Yeah.
It should be 8 by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so we want to be able to get up on stage at a big distribution conference and be able to serve the majority of the audience, not just one slice of it.
So you said something that was kind of interesting to me that I think is a real pearl of wisdom. Your owner comes in and says, "Let's go faster, harder. I want to hire 25 more salespeople. Go, go, go. Pour gas on it." And you're saying no, which is kind of the opposite of what usually happens, right? But I want to get it right before we mash the gas too much, right? Is that
100% right? Yeah.
So, it's almost like this reinventing cycle where you're having to rediscover every couple of years product market fit, constantly adjusting, getting it right, getting it bigger, and then go big, or getting it more efficient before you really throw the gas on the fire. So
we'll know that moment when we get there. So in other words, when we feel like the flywheel's moving, product market fit is there for all of the things, then we'll pour gas on it. We'll be in a really good spot because I have an owner willing to invest whatever we need to grow super fast.
Mm-hmm. And he sounds like Ricky Bobby, right? I want to go fast.
Yeah.
So
no matter what, we'll never go as fast as he wants us to go.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. And what a healthy relationship, right? Let's go. I'm supporting, but you have latitude to make it right, and then to go at your own pace and figure stuff out.
I've gotten a couple of weekend texts about doing something by the end of the year, for example. I won't state exactly what he was requesting, but a couple times they were like completely unrealistic, like completely maybe beyond the laws of physics unrealistic.
Yeah.
But I love the relationship we have. I'm grateful for it, and actually like that he's thinking big all the time. And yeah, no, it's a really good setup.
I know, we should probably talk to Pete at some point, but on the podcast, but the entrepreneur mentality of, you don't quit and just go on a boat, and hang out. You go on the boat and you run your company from the boat, and you start another company, and it's just fun, right? It's just competitive and fun and an outlet for your energy. So that's kind of neat.
Well, that's a great point. I want to actually say something I didn't say before, which was the technology that he built allowed him to drive 10x the industry average while working half time.
Yeah, that's the name of the game.
When he was earlier in his career, before he built out the technology that put him in complete control, he would actually calculate the cost, not the cost of like travel, but how much business costs there would be if he left on vacation.
Okay.
Like so much like business cost, like lost business or lost profit on, per day for every day he was gone.
So if I spend a week in Miami, it's going to cost me $200 a night in a hotel, and it's going to cost the business $150,000 because I'm not here. Wow. Yeah, and then if you have the right tools, you can kind of crank back and say, okay, I don't really necessarily have to be here, or
right.
If I'm not here for a little bit, keep going.
Yeah, you got to the point where he'd get up and his wife would say, "Are you fishing, hunting, playing golf, or working today?" And
I don't know. I hadn't decided yet. Yeah,
but he was able to with the technology actually manage. If he was on a boat off the Florida coastline, he could manage his company.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that sounds awesome. So maybe talk to us. Let me shift gears just a little bit. The greater economy, right? We talk about like economic cycles. Boy, it sure is a turbulent time right now. It's hard to place bets in your chair, on what when to press the gas and when to press the brake. What do you think we are in the economic cycle, or what as a seasoned business leader? How are you approaching this downturn right now in the greater cycle, economic cycle?
Yeah, that's a complex question. I think that in many cases, the businesses that actually make investments in these times actually do much better, not only through that cycle, but actually after. I could give you many examples of that. We're in a period of great uncertainty. I think it's causing a lot of people to be very cautious in their spend. I think there were, a few months ago, predictions that IT spend, for example, would be up significantly from 24. I think that's going to slow maybe a little bit in the near term. But I think it's more about volatility and trying to predict the timing of all these things, right? Now, some people say, I think I saw something from Ray Dalio the other day where he makes a point that a lot of it's too late. Like a lot of things are already, they've gone far enough that it's going to have a ripple effect for some period of time.
Yeah.
And I know that's true. I haven't studied it deeply, but logically that's true. What I always come back to are sort of first principles, the basics, right? Focus on the basics, deliver the basics. And that's what we do day in and day out here. And I think for our industry, if you look at all of distribution, and then you were able to extrapolate or take out our customers, they look fundamentally different from a making money perspective. And so in many cases, they think differently. I'm surprised, like as a distributor, a for-profit distributor, I think of the primary job as making money, making profit. It's not a bad thing, right? Like you're in a for-profit business, that's the job, is to make money. But many companies, you see a lot of lifestyle businesses. In many cases, we see, surprisingly, zero focus on profitability. We're focused on the top line. We're focused on sales. Well, if you do the math in distribution, because it's a very like low cash, your main investment is in inventory. Probably have a lot of investment in accounts receivable. You could mathematically run yourself out of business by growing too fast. And that sounds very strange, but it's actually true.
Yeah.
And the smartest distributors are hardcore focused on making profit. And so now's the time to do that. And whether it's with our tech or with someone else, like you should definitely leverage technology to do the things that get to order level profit variables.
So it seems like, distribution is always, it's relatively shock proof. Like people don't stop buying things. There's always something getting moved around and distributed. Like if you're a manufacturer of high tech chips in China, and then something happens and then the tariffs or something, that can really shut you down in a hurry. But like distribution, like people buy, clothes and food and gas and all the things that make life go round. It seems like the challenge is the variability in pricing, which is kind of exactly where you guys are, right? And then if you get that right, you can really. It's kind of almost an interesting MBA type problem, right? You have this mishmash of stuff that's coming in, going out. Assuming that you have people and electricity and lights, to put on a truck. It's just kind of an optimization game at some point of you can do really good or really not great at all, or even negative if you're not careful.
That's right. I think like every decision is an optimization of some sort, right? And there are different ways to gain or have competitive advantage. Maybe you manufacture and distribute some product and you're the only game in town. That's a really great place to be. But if you're in a competitive space, which most of the companies are, industrial supplies, for example, HVAC, plumbing, just classic distribution subverticals, a way to gain a competitive advantage is to use technology to outcompete the competition.
Get it there
in fact,
more.
If you're not doing it, you're probably going to get outcompeted.
Yeah. And then the more complex the economy, the worse it is, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I think this is also really important is many of these distribution companies, they're trying to figure like, how do I compete against the big guys, the big companies? And again, I come back to the same answer. A way to do it is with technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there are technologies that help really like make you much more competitive against the biggest players in the industry. And we're doing some things I think that are truly unique and differentiated that some of the bigger players aren't even doing.
Yeah.
We're also not doing some things that the bigger players are doing that I'd like us to be doing. But I think it's really important that you can compete with the bigger players. You can compete in your space with technology. Technology can be a competitive advantage for you.
Well, if you're going to talk to the next generation, software company CEO, you got any words of advice, for someone that's just starting out? What do you focus on that you feel like is important in your role as CEO of a growing software company?
So just a basic software, brand new software company.
Yeah, SaaS, and you kind of think you know what you're doing. What do you focus on? What is your words of advice for the?
I mean, mine are be maniacal, hardcore about product market fit. And I didn't invent this. I actually really like this term though, which is fall in love with the problem. If you're not falling in love with the problem, it's going to be harder. I think that's a really good one. And I'm big on design and user experience, get customer feedback, but product market fit is essential. I love the storytelling, the messaging. I love all those different parts, but you have to, like, I sort of agree with Steve Jobs, right? Like, build insanely great products
and understand why you're building them for the customer. Understand the problem.
Exactly right.
Very cool. Well, it's kind of all about getting out there in the world and making stuff happen. You got any great travel stories you want to share with us?
I don't know if they're super exciting. I mean, I had one I'll start with one as a teenager where my parents had this brilliant idea of seeing the country. And so we live in Grand Rapids, which is on the sort of eastern side of the country, right, Midwest. But my mom had a brother in San Diego. And so the brilliant idea is we would take the train from Grand Rapids to San Diego in
Wow.
coach.
Oh, wow. Oh, God. Okay.
But that's a 20 some hour train ride.
Yeah.
And a couple things happened on the way. I guess as we were passing through Chicago, the train got shot at.
Good.
Um,
Okay.
And then later, further in the Midwest, I was in Nebraska or wherever we were. We actually hit a cow. The train hit a cow. I couldn't sleep, and as a teenager, as a young teenage male, sitting in a coach seat for 20 some hours wasn't the most desirable thing to do. And then finally, we got there and we got our rental car, and I think the rental car made it for a couple miles before that blew up, and it was a brand new car.
Oh, no.
And so it's sort of like the National Lampoon's Vacation to start. And long story short, we actually took a sleeper car home,
Okay.
which was a lot better.
Yeah.
Later in my professional life, I don't jump on a plane or a train seeking to talk to the person next to me. What I found though is when I do, I almost always get really interesting stories.
Yeah.
I've talked to people who worked with the Dalai Lama, for example, or whatever. And I don't know, maybe I'm sensing something that makes me want to talk to that person, but I don't generally seek to do it. But one flight from LA to Detroit, I was in business class, and this man sat next to me. We didn't talk at all. Nothing was happening. And they started ordering or taking our orders for food, and the two choices were a pasta dish or steak. And I said, I'll get the pasta. And the guy said, why didn't you get the steak? And I said, well, I don't generally eat red meat on days I don't work out. And he's like, okay, all right. Well, anyway, turned out that was Emmanuel Stewart, who was one of the greatest boxing trainers
No kidding.
probably in history.
Okay.
And so we hit it off, and we ended up talking for 3 straight hours about sports, about nutrition, about training. He trained some phenomenal fighters, Tommy Hitman Hearns and Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko, and like a whole host of awesome fighters. He invited me to his gym in Detroit, the Gronk Gym. But just that, the not ordering the steak is what provoked the conversation. So that was kind of a fun one. Talk about how things happen like that story. The reason that I'm here at Cavallo is because of a sick cat. Like, isn't that crazy? Like,
Oh, okay.
If my wife's favorite animal had not been sick in late 2018, I wouldn't be in this job. So what happened was we always come back to Grand Rapids. We were living in San Diego at the time, and we were getting ready to go that next weekend for the week of Thanksgiving. And when we go, her family's so large, every single night is filled with family activities. But my wife was worried about her favorite pet because he was suddenly coming down with something, and she didn't want something bad to happen, like have him die while we were not there. So I said, well, why don't you go? You've got your big family coming in town. I'll just stay back, and then I'll go to Grand Rapids in a few weeks. And so I rescheduled my trip a few weeks later, and I had a full week of things I could do. And I was able to have a lunch meeting with the owner of the distribution business and sales pad at the time, which is where I learned about the company and the fact that they were looking for either growth equity or to hire a new CEO. And I just rolled off a pretty sizable gig with a Fortune 500 company. And so the timing was perfect. Like the planets literally like sort of aligned for all that to happen.
Wow. It's so fun. Like when you get out there in the world and you talk to people, it's like, I know we keep saying that on the podcast, but it's really, just say hi and then, ask questions and you never know. Right.
You never know.
It's kind of like the butterfly effect. This one little decision kind of just had this mushroom effect that was kind of fun.
That's right.
So talk to people, get out there in the world and talk to people. So that's kind of fun.
Exactly.
Well, Mike, it's been great having you here in the Sky Lounge. How can people get in touch with you after this if they want to follow up?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my email address is just mike.biwer@cavallo.com. I'm not sure if that's in notes maybe or not, but that's how they can find me. And Todd, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye for now.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.